course, I think the most important historical event that occurred in March 1992 was the date of my birth, on March 2nd, but I don't think most historians would agree. One other important event that occurred in March 1992 was Bosnia's declaration of independence. After the Soviet Union dissolved, there was a big decision whether to stay a part of Yugoslavia, which had formerly been the Socialist Federative Republic of Yugoslavia, under which Bosnia was a part of, or to split off and form their own nation. There was a lot of pressure because Croatia and Slovenia had already declared their independence, and a coalition of three ethnically based parties among the three ethnic groups of Bosnia, the Serbs, Bosnians, and Croatians, kind of had a disagreement. The Serbs wanted to remain part of Yugoslavia, but the Bosnians and Croatians were for independence. They held a referendum, and there was a 63% turnout, so 63% of Bosnians went, and 99.7% of those who voted for independence. So it was an overwhelming majority of those who voted, and an overwhelming majority of the people of Bosnia who voted for Bosnia's independence on March 3rd, 1992. However, the Serbs still didn't believe that this was the right thing to do, so it inspired a Bosnian War, which lasted until 1995, even though the Bosnian independence was recognized a month later internationally. Another important world event that occurred in March of 1992 was the ending of apartheid in South Africa after years of oppression of black people living in the country. Frederick de Klerk, the last white president of South Africa, who served from 1989 to 1994, came into office as a conservative, and he radically switched his position from his political history. One of his first actions was to free Nelson Mandela from prison, and he continued to offer a white-only referendum in 1992. He brokered the end of apartheid, primarily because of the unrest of blacks that existed in the country. They had gotten tired of being oppressed, and it was time for the regime to end. The National Party had a Vote Yes campaign that was unlike any campaign that had existed in South Africa to that date. There were large political gatherings, and it was incredible compared to there had been nothing like it in South Africa before. And even though it was a whites-only referendum, which the African National Committee opposed because it didn't include all of the people of Africa, especially those who were most significantly impacted by the referendum. But in order for the referendum to hold impact over the political majority, the American National Committee kind of had to support it because it was absolutely necessary that whites supported this movement. They really didn't need to worry, though, because it was a pretty overwhelming majority who voted yes. 68.7% voted yes, while 31% voted no. And on March 17, 1992, the vote happened, and de Klerk said, "Today, we have closed the book on apartheid." And sure enough, at the end of his term in 1994, Nelson Mandela became the first black president of South Africa, and since, there's been no further white presidents. There were a little hairier cases that happened closer to home, things that didn't have such a positive ending eventually. One of them was the case of Leona Helmsley, an American businesswoman who was nicknamed the Queen of Mean. About almost 10 years prior to 1992, she purchased an $11 million mansion, which wasn't good enough for her. She wanted an $8 million remodeling, including a ballroom and lots of other things that are not really what you typically include in your house. She forced some of her associates to sign paperwork that marked tax-free billings, or marked them as tax-free business expenses, so forging these things. And then after the work was finished, she refused to pay the contractors. So, in response, the contractors submitted the falsified invoices, which began a federal criminal investigation. And a lot of the testimonies about Helmsley were awfully harsh. They were her former employees quoting her saying things like, "We don't pay taxes, only the little people pay taxes." And all of her employees unanimously feared her hostile personality, her arrogance, and cited her as having naked greed. She was sentenced to 16 years, but acquitted of extortion, which could have potentially sentenced her to life. However, Alan Dershowitz appealed. She got an appeal lawyer who appealed and got a reduced sentence with most charges dropped. She was eventually sentenced to 4 years and served only 18 months for evading taxes. Guess she really was the queen of mean. Another case that happened in home was the infamous case of Mike Tyson. He's the youngest heavyweight boxing champ who came from a very rough background, and he was arrested in July 1991 for the rape of Desiree Washington, an 18-year-old Miss Black, Rhode Island. He invited her to an Indianapolis hotel room, and the two had been previously acquainted. Washington alleged that Tyson forced her down and raped her. And during the trial, Tyson insisted that it was consensual and that she wanted to have sex with him. But testimonies from his own personal chauffeur who drove Washington home that night, Virginia Foster, cited that she absolutely seemed shocked and out of sorts. And Thomas Richardson, the ER physician who examined her 24 hours later, said that her condition illustrated rape. Tyson was considered hostile and defensive during the trial because he continued to insist that he'd done nothing wrong. And Judge Patricia Gifford said, rape is rape, even though it was kind of seen as a precedent in date rape prosecution. And she cited Tyson's attitude as a factor in her sentencing to 6 years, claiming consistently that he had done nothing wrong and that Washington had misunderstood his intentions, that he hadn't forced her down. And again comes lawyer Alan Dershowitz, who fired an appeal, and citing that Washington had a history of one false rape accusation and that Gifford blocked testimony that would have been against Washington. In spite of that, Tyson ended up serving 3 years. There was a lot going on in 1992, and I guess my birth probably wasn't the most important political moment. Things were happening in Bosnia. They declared their independence. Apartheid ended in South Africa. Wonderful things happened on other sides of the globe, and 2 criminals were convicted of crimes here in the United States.